So what I want to do now is just kind of go over some of the slides you'll recognize because that's the pitch deck that I sent you guys to try out originally, but with some extras. This deck is actually one that we use in San Diego quite a bit. It was developed about 6-7 years ago for Connect. Connect was or still is, but it's not as functional as it used to be, is a group that is intended to help companies bridge from the university and from startup status to the point where they can get investor money. So what we have tried to do is we tried to create a deck that investors will look at and give you the necessary information to get people serious about investing. And what I'm talking about is the deck for the initial presentation, the one that gets you to the next meeting, the one that gets you to the point where the investors are saying, I really want to look at more. It doesn't tell everything about the business, but it kind of gives the key issues, some of the things we were talking about, and some additional things like a little bit of financials and a little bit about a timeline. And so I want to go through each one of those a little bit. Some of you guys actually did pretty good. I mean, you followed that template or part of the template, the part that I gave you. Some of you kind of just made it up. And okay, I mean, as long as you cover all the facts, I don't have any trouble with that. But if you don't cover the facts and you make it up, then I get upset. So, all right. So let me do that. And by the way, this is the time if you don't agree or you want to talk, speak up. So let's make this more interactive because this is really a tool for you. This is not me giving you any wisdom. It's a tool that you're going to hopefully be able to use when you talk about your ventures. So the goal is really simple. You want to tell the story as clearly as possible. You want to get people excited about that story. You want to tell them things, just enough to get these people to really start asking questions, to get that second meeting where they ask about more details, where they are suddenly putting experts in the room to talk to your experts. Everyone is going to be unique. It's going to be tailored to your thing, but a template kind of gives you the framework and the kinds of things that you're going to need to include in that kind of a presentation. And that was the reason for doing what I did. Also, it helps you have more discipline about time. Most investor pitches, if you get 15 to 20 minutes, you're going to get a lot with these guys. But the worst of all worlds is if you haven't engaged them within the first 90 seconds and you see them going for those phones and they start looking at their phone or they start looking for an excuse to leave the room, you are dead. And there's no point in trying, you're going to have a hell of a time resurrecting it. So you want to grab them in that first 90 seconds, get that. That's why we had that get the elevator pitch right kind of thing, which, by the way, most of you did not nail your elevator pitch. We should have a whole workshop on that alone and make you do elevator pitches. Very important. Also very hard. Not a bad thing that you can't get it the first time, but it's really important that you get that and you practice with people who can offer you a critique on that, because that 90 seconds is critical for getting these guys engaged. Most investors have the attention span of a gnat, and they will disappear on you very quickly. So again, less is more. You don't want this thing to be overwhelming. For the scientist who has got that great graphic artist that makes the ultimate slide, get rid of him. You want something to be simple and get the message across. You don't want just enough to get people to pay attention. And keep make certain if you have a logo that logo is in the same spot and people see it every time, because you want them to remember you. If you have a tagline, remember that. That's going to be the thing that sticks in their heads. It's just like advertising. You're going to be taking the same kinds of strategies that you would if you were advertising a product, only now you're advertising your idea to get these guys to pay attention to you. 12 to 14 slides is a good thing. Don't overload them. You should see some white space on those slides. Don't try, some of my slides are terribly guilty of, they look like there's a story. Well, that's because you can read them later on. They're terrible to present. They should be 3 or 4 bullets, And you should be speaking, the bullets should just be kind of guideposts. You shouldn't be at the point where you're doing what I'm doing right now, which is reading them. It should be just enough to catch it. You don't want people to be so focused on that they're not paying attention to you. Okay? And also, if you've got a lot of details, put some backups in there. Anticipate potential questions. Put those backup slides. Don't necessarily show them, but be prepared to go to one. If somebody asks you a question about a detail, have a slide. Then you say, you just go to that slide directly and say, and show them more detail. That is a very impressive thing. Investors like that because it tells them two things. You've thought about their questions, their issues, and you've prepared for it. And that's, especially if the answer is right in your slide. And the other thing I'd say, just FYI, if you don't know an answer to a question, don't make it up. They always figure it out, and then you always look bad. So just be honest. You say, well, that's something we have to look into. Because if you don't do that, like I say, then everybody begins to call everything into question. What is the credibility issue? Okay? So in the introduction, 30-second elevator pitch. I think I was saying to you guys 90 seconds, but anyway you slice it, it's at the very beginning. It's the intro, who you are, what business are you in, what markets do you compete, and what are some of the milestones to date. Those are the kinds of things everybody wants to know.
Yeah, Mike, just to comment on that this was the thing that I think nobody covered.
Right.
During yesterday. So it would be great that for the companies that get selected for Thursday, they practice this.
I would say the best thing they could do right now is whip up their elevator pitch. And then if you all gather in a bunch and you say you want to do it, I'm happy to listen to them. I mean, I can be really critical if you like. Anyways, I think it's important, and please try and do it. And then the other thing you want to get to early on is, what do you want out of these guys? You want money? Okay, talk about it. You want some additional team members? Do you want you want a partnership? Make certain that the ask is at least the beginnings of an attempt to get that going, so that people kind of get a clue as to what they're going to be paying attention to. Okay? Now the pain, okay, the pain is really important. This is the problem right here. Everybody wants to know, what is it, and is it something that people are willing to pay for? Who's your customer, right? Quantify the problem. How much does it cost the person who has that pain, right? Let them know that what you're doing is actually addressing something that people give a damn about. Your solution. You want to get in there and tell people, and remember, these are not technical people. Investors are very simple people. They want to know what it is, how much are they going to make, how much is it going to cost them to get to the point where they own it, are you the right guys to do it, and when are they going to see the money? Most of them are not going to talk to you at this stage about high science. Once they get excited about it, then they're going to have their experts come in and really grill you about the science. That's when you get to talk about it and show everybody how smart you are. But right now, what you really want to do is you want to say, look, I got a solution, and this is what it's going to do, and just enough to kind of convince them that you know what the hell you're talking about. Very important. I don't know how many times I've been in pitches where I get into them, they're science projects. I mean, if the elevator pitch has grabbed me and then I get to this one and I get a science project, I'm back on my phone again. Because I don't want to hear all that stuff. Most of the time I don't understand it if I'm an investor, although I do because I'm a scientist, but you get the picture. So, all right, so what you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out, and I've just kind of beaten the no technology in detail to death. You want to try and convince everybody that your solution is something that people are going to pay for. Why are they going to pay for it? Is it going to save them some money? Is it going to allow them to do something they couldn't do before? Reach a group of people they couldn't reach before. Hit on those specific things, Sounds like somebody's Skype is calling them there. Business model. How are you going to actually target your customers? How are you going to price the thing? What's your revenue? Graphs are good. Okay. Now, a lot of people, in the US, I didn't hear it here yet, are big about, oh, I'm going to do Kickstarter and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do all that. No. Many of the technologies, if an investor hears Kickstarter, they get really nervous. It's kind of like, uh-oh, they're actually going to try and sell this thing to end users. Think about the possibilities of partnering. Think about the possibilities of a license. If you are going to do something that's going to be a direct sale, it really has to be almost obvious to them that you're the only guys that can make this thing. And that when you make this thing, it's going to be, no one else is going to be able to come in. For instance, if somebody tells me they're going to make a medical device and sell it directly, and I know that Medtronic makes similar devices, I'm probably not going to talk to them very long unless Medtronic is interested in it and says maybe we'll add that to our line. Because I know that if Medtronic can do this area, they're going to crush them. And even if Medtronic doesn't have good technology, if they're even close, they're going to crush them. So you've got to think about that. That's why it's important, by the way, to think about competition in the broad sense when you're thinking about your model, because if it's one of the big guys and they're close, you know, the best thing you can do is to possibly go and engage them rather than going, even contemplating the possibility of going head to head, unless you've got something that is so amazing. And, you know, I would say that's, now, having said that, you know, 25 years ago, Qualcomm and Irwin Jacobs said, gee, we got something that's really smart. You know, we got this really micro radio that will make phones, you know, which at the time were, you know, the only way you could ever communicate with a fleet of trucks or anything like that was with a radio, and you had to have huge towers, and there was, you know, one system was, that was it. Well, then they kind of came up with this idea of cellular phones. So it kind of worked. But those kinds of really transformative technologies are rare, and they don't happen probably more than once or twice in a lifetime. And we've already been through that lifetime, so probably won't happen. All right, technology solution is a good thing to have if it's really important to selling your story. But again, not super technical with jargon. Assume that these guys are the best you can hope for, is that they may be at the level of a science magazine, maybe more like a Scientific American, you know, maybe more like Cartoons in Science or something like that. These are not going to be the kind of guys that are go in there and see the subtleties of all your stuff. So I think the important thing is to, you know, talk to the science. If you're going to do a technology, so talk at the level that you would talk to your grandmother about it. Unless your grandmother's a Nobel laureate, which I don't think many of them are. So, okay? How big is the market? Very important. That's what they want to know. That's one of the big questions. How big? How much money am I going to make? Is it something that fits into a market that is huge? That's what they want to know. And really figure out what segment you can get into. Don't talk about, I'm going to go out and conquer the world in a giant market. Figure out the segment that you're going to be able to get into and be successful in. Because once you're in there, then you can expand. They want to see a realistic plan for actually getting yourself established. Most of the time in pharmaceuticals, they like the small indications. If someone talks to me about a cancer drug and they talk to me about a rare tumor, I like that, because that may get me a rapid approval and it gives me high margins, and then maybe it works on the others. Genentech did that with a couple of products, and they've kind of done really well with some of their products. Happens with the big guys right along with startups. Pick a niche and get going on it. That is probably the number one thing I could tell you. And again, the reason for that is simple. It's a manageable development program, and it's something that people can understand. People have a hard time believing that you can get the big thing in one of these presentations. Competitive landscape. I've heard a couple people say there's no competition. First rule, there's always competition. Somebody's always solving a problem some way. It may not be, you know, if you're saying, oh, I'm gonna deal with this disease. It may not be and you're doing a drug, it may not be there are any other drugs, but there's probably another way of treating the disease. Talk about the competition in the broadest sense. If it's a, for instance, now you've got a fair number of diseases where a medical device, and if you're talking about, for instance, gastric reflux disease, it's not just drugs anymore. It's okay, there are drugs, proton pump inhibitors, and you know, the old histamine 2 antagonists, but now there's also medical devices. So if I was thinking about a solution to that, I would have to think about devices and drugs. Okay, well, there's probably some other people who come in and say, well, I've got this really great drug. Well, is there some other, or is there a lifestyle change? Insurance companies love lifestyle changes because they don't have to pay for them. So you have to understand that, because payers will understand it. And those are the people that ultimately are going to put money in your pocket. So think about competition a little more broadly. I know it's hard, but it's important, and it's something to think about right away. Also, what is coming down the road? If you look at competitive analyses from professionals who do this for a living, they look at patents coming down the road that could potentially be there. So show that you are aware of the fact that there are other people. Your colleagues who may be at another university, you hear that they're tinkering around with an idea. Yeah, it's not a product yet, but they might have another approach. Write it down. It's important. It's competition, potential competition. So I think that it's important that you think about it. And it's, again, competition is very important. Investors want what they call an unfair advantage. And an unfair advantage means that the competition is either weak or non-existent, but they have to decide that it's weak or non-existent. You just have to give the facts and talk about the features and compare it a little bit. Okay? And by the way, the best way to do this is to create a matrix where you have key competitors down one way and key characteristics that way, and maybe do an X or a green or maybe a plus plus or something like that. Compare them all side by side. It doesn't have to be quantitative, but it should give them some idea of some rankings that they can look at. And you know, the 3 or 4 key characteristics that would be there. And if that's not clear, I'll be happy to dig one out for you and show you what I mean sometime while I'm here, okay? Or I can send you something. Competitive advantage. This is important. You need to tell people what you think your unfair advantage is. What differentiated features do you have that will get the decision makers to pay attention to you? Because that's important to them. How long does the solution last? Is it one of those things that if I have that solution, 5 years into the future, it's not going to be important? Well, I need to understand that, because that tells me how much revenue I'm going to end up with. And then I'm going to have to make a determination whether it's worth my investment to collect that 5 years of revenue. If it's something that's going to be, you know, and I have to say the biggest problem with that is, if we look at some technologies in the medical area right now, there was a time when life cycles for medical technologies ran basically the length of a patent. And it was great. The problem is right now, innovation in some areas of medical devices only gives you maybe 2 or 3 years before you have another solution competing. And in diagnostics, it's even worse. And so these are things that you need to understand. Even though you have a great advantage when you first introduce the product, it may go away fairly fast. And understanding that will be important, because again, the investors will get this. They spend their time trying to figure out answers, and their primary interest is in figuring out why they should say no. It's up to you to convince them why they should say yes. Okay? How often will it be replaced? Is it one of the, a lot of investors love something called a razor blades model. It's great. I've got, you know, I sell a gadget in, and then I sell constant consumables every periodic, you know, and hopefully a short period, you know. So if I'm out there doing that and I've got a medical device and it requires having something done to it every time, or then they're happy about that because they can collect that recurring revenue. And then of course you need to tell people why they should pay. What's the value proposition for the customer? And the other thing I would just say in medical, again, since a lot of you are thinking a little bit about medical, the customer is important to identify too. Who is the customer? How many people think it's the patient? Oh, good. Nobody does. All right. God, you guys are rare. I almost had the big one, because most of the time everybody raises their hand and it's like, and you'd be surprised, people that you think are going to get it right away, but you guys must have had a few of these lectures before or something like that, huh? Okay. Well, it's obviously the insurance company. Usually, although, here's a curveball for you. And I was going to talk about this before, but since you guys are all so smart, I guess I'm going to have to show that I'm a little smarter on this. What's happening now is, right now you would say, the insurance company, right? Or the government, whoever's paying the insurance. But now in the US, we have another nice little trick from the Accountable Care Act, the Affordable Care Act. I say accountable because that's what it's really becoming. It's not really affordable at all. But the Affordable Care Act set up something called accountability assurance organizations. And these little jewels are supposed to set standards of care. And what's happened is some of the experimental ones have been, okay, if a hospital discharges a patient and then they go back in for a hospital-acquired infection, who pays to have that infection cured? Not the insurance company anymore. The hospital has to eat it because the hospital screwed up. So now the customer, for a product that actually does a good job killing off infections or preventing infections in hospitals, is the hospital. Now it's an interesting, so figuring out the customer for some medical technologies is much more fun than it was before. Something to think about. Go-to-market strategy. This is something I didn't put in last time, but this is going to be important. Somehow you have to summarize a marketing plan and a distribution plan, and you should talk about some of the initiatives that you're going to do in this thing. People need to understand that you have thought about this. You may never go to market. Your go-to-market plan may be, sell it to Merck and let Merck sell it. But if you're going to be talking about a market, people need to kind of get a feel for what is it going to take to push this product to revenue. Okay? This is more of a tactical slide. Okay, company traction. This is where team needs to come up. Team should be the big thing in a startup. If your team is good, and a lot of teams, a lot of investors look for team members who've been there and done that. CEOs who have had successful exits and have made money. Their second favorite one, and actually it's fairly close to the ones who've made money for them, are the CEOs that have failed quickly, that haven't wasted investor money. The ones they hate the most are the guys who've hung on forever and still failed because they don't make any money at all, and that's a bad deal. So it's important to have a discussion of who they are, what they've done in the past, and why they're going to make you something. And you're not going to be able to put all that on a slide. You're going to have to talk about that. Advisors, especially people who are kind of gurus in the field, that are acknowledged. Everybody goes to some particular guys in the cancer drug development area. A guy named Dan Von Hoff, very big. If he's on your advisory board, people think, aha. Unless they think Dan's full of it. But for the most part, because he has advised and successfully, when he's on the board, it says, well, these guys are thinking about the importance of drug development in this area. So having some of the key advisors is good. Barriers to entry, they want to know about that's primarily your IP strategy. How good is it? Is that IP strategy well thought out? Does it actually address potential risks? Very important. Milestones achieved. Some of you guys had some milestones already. Like if you've thrown it into an animal and its own proof of concept, that's an important milestone. And make certain that those things, and then ultimately later on you'll have to talk about the others. Now, I would say the key thing that they're going to look at, but it doesn't have to be as rigorous as it would be in a business plan. They want to know a little bit if you've thought about financials. A 5-year estimate is something that people look for. And I gotta tell you, they're more interested in seeing that you've thought it through and you have a process behind it. almost everybody believes that financials that are shown by startups, especially pharmaceutical or medical devices, are wrong. But they want to see your thought process. It's more about that than it is about the accuracy. But the other thing I would just say is if you're going to show numbers on this slide, you better make certain that if you're talking about sales numbers, like, saying, this thing could be, a $500 million product, and your financials say, you're only going to get to 50 million down here, and people look at that and they go, something wrong here, and they might think that you're not together. So think about that being consistent. But again, if you're looking for investment, and some of you are, you should probably talk about how much and how you're going to use it. Use of funds slide is the one they also look at a lot. It's like if you're talking about using more than 50% of the money for what is general and administrative, or if you're paying the founders big salaries, it's a no-no. And they will just, if they don't laugh, they'll be on their phones again, and you won't have. How long is the money going to last? Hopefully it lasts until you get to what is a reasonable inflection point and an actual increase in value. And of course the other thing is, is this all you're going to need, or are we looking at, if I'm a Series A investor and I'm looking at the possibility of 2 or 3 more rounds, then I got, oh my God, I'm going to get crushed by some Series B guy who comes in and says, and the other thing is, some investors, like a Series B guy, he may actually see this vulnerability and say, oh, well, I think we'll let him run out of money, and then he will do a job on the previous investors. So, very important to try and understand your financing strategy. If you don't understand it, and most people don't, talk to advisors. Talk to people who have been there and done that. They can tell you the kinds of games. Remember, the investors that you're going to be talking to are professionals. They do this for a living. They know how to make money. You're not. At least not yet. So they have an advantage on you. Well, I would say an unfair advantage, but it's something you have to keep in mind. Now, this is a slide I happen to like because this covers a lot. It summarizes a lot of things. It tells me what your plan is, and it tells me how you're going to spend my money. And I happen to like this one because I actually made this one for Connect and said, this summarizes a lot right here. It shows me that you actually understand the product development pathway for you. And then it shows me that you've got a pretty good idea of how much it's going to cost, and I get a pretty good idea how you're going to use my money and everything else, and how long it's going to last, because the arrows are there. This is one you might want to think about putting in. Not everybody does it, but when I was doing these for Connect, I made people do this one because I thought it really got to a lot of things. A lot of investors like this one. And then your summary. You should be talking about your strengths and weaknesses right off the, actually your strengths, no, but be prepared to admit your weaknesses. And you want to get those key points across that you really want the audience to remember. You should definitely make certain that those points were covered in your elevator pitch, because we wanted the elevator pitch to be the thing they all remembered anyways. And then any other points that you've developed through the presentation that are critical to your survival, like how much money and all the other good stuff. And I think that's all I had to say about that. But this is, and this is, I think, this is 5 more slides than I asked you guys to do. I asked you guys to do 8. And I think that a couple of them I totally left out. But what I would suggest to you, the number one thing that you should really work on, and if you want to, I'm happy to listen to them, is elevator pitch is critical. Get that. And I know it's hard to do. And it's particularly hard since I'm not capable of understanding you in Spanish, which would make it easier for you. But most investors will give you the same problem. So, here I am being a real world situation for you. But this is key in my mind. And the other thing I would suggest to you, if you can think about constructing maybe that timeline slide a little better, those are the kinds of, if we were to just look at those things between now and the time I'm out of here, or if you want to send to me, some ideas, I'm happy to spend more time with you, helping you with that. Because I think it's really important and it'll help you a lot. And I know You will also have another resource, and Neil's been through this. I think I pounded him on a couple of these things too. And so he's got a lot of experience that he can also give you some insights on. And I would encourage you to do that. Communicating your idea is probably the second most important thing you'll do. If you can't tell people and get them excited about your idea, and you can't tell an investor why they should put their money in, you are done. And all that science is great, and I would just suggest that you work hard to get your tenure as a faculty member, because that's where you're going to be working. This is salesmanship, yes, but it's important. And please, you know, feel free to ask any questions and do anything you have to do in order to get it right. It's that important.